Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1989 action film License to Kill. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Carl for yet again requesting another Bond review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, License to Kill is the last film in the Bond series starring Timothy Dalton as 007. That wasn't really the initial plan. Dalton actually signed on for at least 3 films, and they were even in pre-production for the third film for a release date in 1991, but something happened with the rights to the Bond films and MGM when MGM was bought by another company, and so it just caused this whole mess. And Dalton never played the role again. And since this is technically the last time that he played Bond, he went out with a bang, with honestly what might be my favorite Bond film. I really like this movie. I think it's not only a really good action film, but I also think it's a great Bond movie because of the fact that it does have some of the elements that you look for out of a Bond film with the gadgets and stuff like that, and stuff with Q and so on, and some lavish locations and nice sets. But it stands out from a lot of other Bond movies even today because of the fact that it's Bond unleashed, Bond on a mission of revenge, mixed in with some elements of other films and other stories like Yojimbo, where Bond's turning the bad guys henchmen against him and playing mind games. I think it has one of the best Bond girls in Pam Bovier, and I think it has some of the best action. And I'm not the only one. The director, John Glen, he feels that this is his best film. He feels that this was the best direction that he ever brought to the screen in his career. He also feels that it's his best Bond film. So I'm not alone on that. And as the years have gone by, the film has definitely gotten more of a following. And I really love to see that because this film is arguably the most underrated film in the entire Bond series. Now, like I was saying earlier, it's directed by John Glen, and yeah, John Glen did a tremendous job with this film. There are a lot of different set pieces, a lot of different moments in this that are just shot in such a great fashion. The underwater sequences, the various different shots that took place in Mexico City, because that was used as the film's setting in order to cut some costs because of the fact that for whatever reason, as the years went by, the Bond films, their budgets never really changed and adjusted to inflation. So when things got to the point where inflation made it so they really needed a little more money to really do some extra location shots and stuff like that, well, MGM never really was able to provide it to the Bond producers. And so they didn't have a lot of money. So they had to cut corners. And one of the ways to do that was to shoot in Mexico City instead of some other lavish setting. And they made it work. They took a hold of a decaying, decrepit, rundown warehouse or studio in Mexico City that was just in such bad shape that anytime it rained, there would be water that would just be pouring through the roof. And they just built their own sets with whatever they could find, and the results are really impressive for something that really was pretty difficult in terms of pulling it off because of the fact that they didn't really have a lot of money to work with. And the fact that John Glenn was already a very established veteran filmmaker really did help this film because the budget was tighter. And when that kind of thing happens, when you have an established veteran behind the camera, you don't have to really worry as much about the limitations. You can just put your nose to the grindstone and go to work. And License to Kill is one of those examples. Like a lot of the other Bond films, a lot of the emphasis when it comes to the grandest, the most spectacular visuals is definitely with the action sequences. You have an opening scene with a really awesome parachuting stunt, as well as a scene where you have a stuntman who gets onto the tail of a plane while it's in midair. And then even from there, you got a lot of stuff that is shot in Key West, Florida, which I thought was a good location. Some nice underwater photography. Then you move to Mexico City. They utilized a retreat of some sorts that was built but was essentially left abandoned. So the retreat that you see that is a front for Sanchez's operation, that wasn't a set. I mean, there were some things that were miniatures, like the helipad that opens up and stuff like that. But there were other things that were just what was there. And it's just a really great use of limited locations and location shots. They chose some nice looking places in Mexico City for Sanchez's mansion. Uh, they also picked a nice location for the casino. And the finale that took place on this treacherous road was also another good location, despite the fact that it was haunted, apparently. So you got John Glenn, his direction is as serviceable, it's as strong, it's as terrific as it has been in any of the other Bond films. And on top of that, he's got to deal with this stretch of road being haunted and weird, strange happenings occurring while they're trying to shoot this movie, like the trucks coming to life, essentially, starting by themselves and just rolling away at night. All kinds of unexplained phenomena. There was this explosion from one of the tanker trucks in the film's climax, and there was a photographer that was taking photos, and one of the photos that they took literally had like a hand of fire that was coming out of the explosion. So yeah, there was a lot of just trippy stuff that was happening in that location, and so they had to deal with that too. So yeah, John Glenn, he deserves a ton of credit for working with the limitations and working with a haunted stretch of road when it comes to License to Kill. The screenplay by Michael G. Wilson and Richard Maybaum, I think it's a solid script. Um, Actually, solid, I think, is honestly an understatement. I think it's a fantastic screenplay. For what it is, I think they did a really good job. For one, there are elements of the script that I personally feel have not been done better in any other film in the Bond series to date, specifically how it handles Q. Q has more to do here. He actually gets some field work. He teams up with Bond. I think the rapport between him and Bond is a lot stronger than in other films because he's not there just for comic relief, or he's not just there to show Bond the latest gadgets. He has more of a purpose when it comes to this script. I also like how the writers handled Pam Bouvier, one of my favorite Bond girls, because she's not only sexy, but she's also a legitimate badass. She can hold her own in believable fashion, and she can go toe to toe with Bond, even verbally, with the little verbal jabs and stuff like that. And the two are a really good pair together, in large part because of how good the script handles her and her interactions with Bond. I love the fact that the edge is really sharp when it comes to this script. almost to the point where it easily could have been rated R. This is a really violent, gritty Bond movie. I mean, you have Felix Leiter who's has his wife killed by these scumbags right after their wedding. He then gets tortured and gets his leg bitten off by a shark and left for dead. Bond, of course, seeing that happen to people he cares about, decides to go rogue, and that's why it's called License to Kill. The original title was License Revoked because of the fact that his license to kill was revoked by MI6 because of the fact that he decided to go rogue and go on his own to get revenge for Felix and his wife. And I love that aspect of this script is very different. Bond unleashed, Bond untethered. He's not on a typical mission for MI6 this time around. He's on a mission for himself. And that raises the stakes in a completely different way. It also humanizes Bond even more because it shows that he has some genuine human emotions like anger and this thirst for revenge. And Bond himself is just as savage as the bad guys. Uh, he takes out a lot of the henchmen in satisfying fashion. With Benicio del Toro's character, and he actually grinds them up in a grinding machine. Lights Sanchez's ass on fire at the end, and even prior to that, there's just a lot of just really gritty, brutal moments. The sequence where Anthony Zerbe's, I think that's who it is. Yeah, Anthony Zerbe's character Crest, he gets put into a decompression chamber by Sanchez and is decompressed to the point where his head explodes in a splatter of blood. And even stuff with the sharks and like the moment with Bond where he knocks out this guy and then puts him into a shelf that's just full of worms. So basically he's leaving that guy to die, getting eaten by just thousands of worms. Yeah, it's a very gritty, edgy Bond movie, and I love that about it. I love Sanchez as the villain. He's charismatic and suave in his own way, but he's also vicious and just really mean. I even like the his henchmen. You know, I like Anthony Zerbe as Milton Crest. I like Milton Crest's character. I even like the corrupt DEA agent Ed Killefer, or even smaller roles like Dario, Sanchez's main henchman, or even someone like Wayne Newton as the televangelist Butcher. So yeah, there's a lot of really likable, interesting, or engaging characters. I even like the stuff between Pam and Lupe. So you have Lupe and her whole thing with Bond and with Sanchez, and then you have Pam feeling jealous and trying to up her game to make it so Bond chooses her instead of Lupe. So I like the sort of drama involving those two. And when it comes to the action, like it definitely does deliver. From the opening sequence with some good stunt work to the underwater chase, which had a really cool disguise for Bond in the form of a manta ray that actually looked real, and some nice little tense little shootouts, little fisticuffs in Key West, some good moments in Mexico, crazy finale on that stretch of road with the semi that's doing wheelies and going on one side and avoiding a missile, and has just really satisfying giant big grand explosions when oil tankers blow up, and it's all done practically. And yeah, it's just a really satisfying film in a lot of ways, and in large part it's due to this script. It's a very satisfying, very fun, screenplay, despite the fact that it does have more of an edge and more of a bite to it than maybe some of the other Bond films previously. And it's just so ahead of its time when it comes to its edge, because that was something that Daniel Craig's Bond films were praised for. And this was doing that multiple years in advance. And for whatever reason, it just didn't get a lot of credit at the time. And in some ways, it still doesn't, because people will come out and say, "Oh, it's just like a generic action movie, like a generic '80s action movie." And I'm like, I highly disagree with that. I wouldn't call this generic at all. It still has that Bond flair. It still has that over the top Bond crazy uh, stunt work that you've come to love in Bond films, and the climax of the semi trucks. And there's a lot of things about it that still just scream Bond. Just because the film didn't do that well in a loaded summer in '89, that doesn't mean that it was somehow a bad movie that didn't deserve a better box office. I mean, the only reason why License to Kill didn't do that well in 1989 in the summer is because the summer of 1989 was one of the most insane summers ever when it comes to the bulk of big movies that summer. You had Batman '89, you had Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you had Lethal Weapon 2, you had, I think, what is it, Star Trek 5, I think, also came out in the summer of '89. You had Ghostbusters 2. You had all of these sequels and all of these big movies that were coming out at the same time. So it just wasn't really able to compete with a lot of those other films. And the marketing didn't help either, because they had to change shit last minute, because the original title was license revoked, but they changed it because they felt that US audiences would be confused and think that it has something to do with the driver's license for whatever reason. So that's why a lot of the posters look kind of cheap or generic. Um, but the film has definitely received its just due as the years have gone by. So yeah, good script by Michael G. Wilson and Richard Maybaum. And I also feel that this film has one of the best casts out of the entire franchise. It has one of the most well-rounded casts, because you just have so many good performers in small roles as well as large ones. You have the headliner, Timothy Dalton, who's back as James Bond, as 007, and he's as dangerous as ever in this one, to the point where he's still doing a lot of his own stunts, much to the chagrin of Cubby Broccoli. And I just love his take on Bond. And here he's able to just flesh his take on the character out even more, show even more angst, even more emotion and anger, and just add so much more weight to the character. He also added a little bit more of that sly humor that people were looking for, that they felt was missing in The Living Daylights. And he's just as capable as he was in the last film when it comes to the action. And he was a suave, debonair ladies' man when he needed to be. I just loved this performance, and it's honestly one of my favorite Bond performances in any of the films when it comes to a portrayal of this character. It really is bittersweet that we never got to see Dalton play this character again, because he was so good in this. And I feel he just would have gotten like even better with more shots at playing 007. Carrie Lowell, I thought she was fantastic as Pam Bouvier, one of my favorite Bond girls. She's not only sexy and hot, nice to look at, but she's also not dead weight. She can hold her own in a fight or in a shootout. She isn't blown off the screen when it comes to sharing scenes with Timothy Dalton. Actually, the two equally showcase the same amount of sparks when it comes to the scenes that they're in. Robert Davi is a really memorable, strong villain as Sanchez. I see people say, "Oh, he's just generic. He's just a generic drug lord," and I'm like, I don't think he's anything close to generic because Robert Davi is such a good, charismatic actor. I mean, he was so believable in this role that he actually went to clubs in Mexico and acted like he owned the place, acted like he was an actual drug lord, and people believed him. So, generic to me is not the right way to put his performance as Sanchez. And I honestly think it's one of the best Bond villains when it comes to a performance by an actor playing a villain in this series because I love it. He's just so much fun to watch playing this role, and his henchmen are really good too. A lot of really talented character actors or up and coming actors like Benicio del Toro as Dario in one of his first major film roles. Anthony Zerbe, who's a very underrated, overlooked character actor, as Milton Crest. Everett McGill as the corrupt DA agent Ed. And it doesn't stop there. You got Wayne Newton, who plays Butcher, the televangelist, who in a lot of ways seems like a precursor of the character that he would play in Ford Fairlane and in Grendel, the head of Grendel Records. David Hedison as Felix Leiter. He's not really a henchman, but now I'm just transitioning into talking about Bond's side of the cast. David Hedison, who comes back as Felix. Um, Frank McGray, who's been in a lot of stuff. He was in this as Sharky. Um, you have Desmond Llewellyn as Q, and it's honestly my favorite performance of his as the character is in this, and he would agree. This is his favorite role when it comes to playing Q in a Bond film. Is his part in this film. And Caroline Bliss comes back as Miss Moneypenny. You also have Talisa Soto, who you might recognize. She's been in a few things. She's in this as Lupe, Sanchez's girlfriend, who has romantic feelings for Bond, and it becomes this sort of rivalry between her and Carrie Lowell. And you even have some other diehard actors who are in this in little roles, like Grandel Bush. He's in this as I think Randall Bush is in Die Hard. He might not have been in Die Hard. It might have been some other actor. I got some things confused because in The Living Daylights, one of the main henchmen, he was one of the henchmen in Die Hard, but I could have sworn Randall Bush was also in Die Hard. Um, yeah, he was in Die Hard. I was right. He was in Die Hard. I think it might have been the guy who was alongside Robert Davi's character as one of the FBI agents. So yeah, Grandel Bush. Um, you also have Kerry Hiroyuki Tagawa in an early role as Quang. So yeah, really good cast. There's just a lot of really talented performers. And just one of the best ever if you just look at it from top to bottom. And you have some other good elements to it. I like the score by Michael Kamen. He replaced John Barry because John was ill and he couldn't do the film. So they decided to replace him, and the producers liked what Michael Kamen did with Die Hard, so decided to bring him in. And I've seen a lot of people say like his score for this sounds too similar to Die Hard, and I respectfully disagree. I don't think it's just a copy of what he did in Die Hard. I think he still puts a Bond spin on it so that it doesn't feel like the same thing all over again. And speaking of music, like you can't talk about a Bond film without like the main title track. And this one definitely has a good one with "A License to Kill" by Gladys Knight. And the other technical elements of the film and aspects of it are also really good, like the cinematography by Alec Millis. I think it's a well edited film by John Grover, especially when it comes to the more pyrotechnic infused action sequences in the film's finale. And it's a movie that has a running time of like over 2 hours, but it doesn't feel like that at all. It doesn't have very many slow spots. It's not boring. It honestly has a pace like a runaway semi or a tanker truck. And I just really love this film. I think it has a legitimate license to thrill. And it just gets better each and every time that I see it. And cannot recommend it enough. Even if you're not really a big fan of Bond films, I would still recommend this because if you're a fan of like 80s action movies, this is a must see if you haven't seen it yet because it's very much in the vein of those late 80s action films that have more of an edge to them, have a bit of blood, a bit of violence, um, and as well as explosions and one-liners and stunts and memorable bad guys and likable heroes. It's just a really great action film. It's not just a good Bond movie; it's a great action film. So yeah, that's my thoughts on License to Kill. And as always, I'll see you later.